My name is Caroline Bald, and I am the co-chair of the BASW Criminal Justice Group. And what we did was with Helen Woods and I and Wayne Reid, we set up these webinars as a way of engaging the conversation around criminal justice and social work. So when I first took on co-chair, one of the questions was, but do you do criminal justice social work in England? And I was very clearly Hootsmon, of course we do. So criminal justice and social work has a long history and a lot of entanglements, if you like. And one of the projects that I was very clearly connected to earlier on was Children Heard and Seen, and that was initially through an academic colleague, Lucy Baldwin, Dr. Lucy Baldwin, and her work on maternal imprisonment. So it's a real pleasure after having worked with Children Heard and Seen and Leanne and the team for a number of years, including placements back in the day, to welcome her to share the work that Children Heard and Seen have been doing regarding children's experiences of parental imprisonment. So it's a very current issue. I think for those who are not aware of the coroner's report regarding baby Aisha, we will be talking about that at another point in webinar, so please keep your eye on future webinars with that, and that's regarding the sad death of a baby within prison. But in this case, what it's really recognising is the impact of imprisonment on children of all ages and all experiences in the community, and how best to support them in those moments of losing a parent physically, but also understanding their own changing identity in not having a parent at home, but also that the stigma that unfortunately all too often can be shared between family members when a parent is not only arrested, but right through to when they come home from prison, so, or perhaps not even to the family home. So I will stop singing your praises, Leanne. And there is a book that I would absolutely recommend. It's a poetry book that Lucy Baldwin and colleagues worked with Children Heard and Seen. There's one particular poem that gets me in the heart every time. It's a 4-year-old saying, "I miss my mum." And it's something that I would say that it's, for those of you that are involved in this work or involved in teaching others around this work, is certainly a resource that I would recommend. And what I'll do is put a link to that in the chat. But other than that, over to you, Leanne, unless there's any questions that anybody has originally about the process. No? Fine. Well, over to you, Leanne, and thank you again for doing this for us.
No, wonderful. Thank you, Caroline. And yeah, the book is really good. I think it was with Ben Reeks and Lucy Baldwin. The book itself is called, and Caroline will put the link in, but the book itself is called Children Seen and Heard. And sadly, we could have registered as seen and heard, so we're heard and seen, and sometimes we get that muddled up. But ultimately, it is a collection of some really wonderful and very, very, very heartfelt poems from children and young people. Well, hello, I just need to let everybody know I am recovering from COVID, so I have a little bit of a croak, so do apologise. I've got my juice firsthand, but if you just hear me drying up a little bit, I might just have to do this with my throat. But hello and welcome everybody, and thanks for joining today. I hope you really find it valuable. I hope the aim of today really ultimately is to raise awareness to the potential harms of parental imprisonment, the impacts on children and young people and the wider family, and what we do then as an organisation to try and mitigate those harms. I want all of you to maybe consider the young people you're currently working with now, and later on, you know, if you do come into contact with children with a parent in prison, and almost just to become curious of those impacts. You know, a lot of children won't identify themselves, and family members won't identify themselves for that support. And it's only through us asking those questions that we get to identify children. I've been with the organisation for 3 years, and was just saying to Wayne before the meeting, he came kindly to Chester University when I was doing my master's social work to come and speak to the students about BASW. As with most students, when the pandemic hit, I was due to go on placement with local authority. in a statutory placement, which sadly did fall through. I'd been following the charity for some time because I had a lived experience of taking my nieces and nephews on visits, and was becoming quite sort of increasingly thinking this should sit with social work. Why is this not on my course? Why has nobody mentioned this? And then sort of gained a real interest in following the charity's work amongst other organisations. And then as the pandemic hit, the charity moved support online, and they advertised for a remote placement. And to my excitement, Chester let me do it. And so I was with them for a 100-day placement, thrown in the deep end, very much so, which is the best way anyway to sort of get an idea and a feel for what an organisation is doing. And then volunteered with them because the job market wasn't open for new graduates still, sadly. And now I've been with them 3 years, and I'm now the deputy operational manager with Children Heard and Seen. I support the online staff. I supervise the online team, which we've now, just set up a new service 2 months ago. Also supervise students and volunteers, amongst other things of delivering training, and basically whatever the organisation needs me to do, then I'm there. I would just like to acknowledge that there could very possibly be some attendees today that have, either through professional experience or personal experience, have had a parent in prison themselves, know of family members that have. I do like to top up any presentation with some sort of case study analysis and actually real life cases. So if that is particularly triggering for anybody, please leave or take a break, take care of yourself. Absolutely, we hope the presentation was going to be about 40 minutes, but see that we're at 10 past already. So I will make sure that we try and keep to a strict time, because I'm always keen for as many questions and answers as possible. However, if there isn't any time, or there's something that you don't want to ask here, then I will put my contact details in at the end, and you'll be able to just contact me directly. So I'm going to share my screen, and hopefully it all goes well, because as an organisation we use Zoom all the time, so Teams generally has gremlins for me, but we tested it before and it seems to be okay. So I'm hoping everybody can see that, because now through the logic of Teams I can't see you, so I'm hoping that's okay and everybody can see. So Children Heard and Seen was set up in June 2014, and ultimately what it was set up by our still CEO Sarah Burrows, who was a manager within Oxford County Council, social work manager within the youth offending team. And what she was seeing consistently was young people that were either at risk of coming into contact with the criminal justice system, or were indeed, then in contact with the criminal justice one way or another, who actually had a parent in prison themselves. And what initially Sarah felt was, well, this surely is a signposting exercise, and we can find a service that I can signpost these young people to then obviously realise that wasn't the case, and quite shockingly so, that there was a real lack of provision for young people. And so began the charity while working a full-time job, and we've now been going for 9 years, and going from strength to strength. Thankfully our team is growing, so we're being able to reach a lot more people. But what Sarah sort of realised initially is that the plan, what she thought the aim of the charity was going to be around reducing that intergenerational harm of offending. And what she then realised when she got to meet and talk to families is actually the shame and stigma was causing such a negative detrimental impact on families. The social isolation felt by people was really what was at the root of sadly all the mental health issues that children were presenting at the time. So the service developed, and so we're committed. And as you can see, I don't want to just read off the slide for you, but ultimately, at the heart of what we do is around that child, and the person that cares for them. We're not focused on the person in prison, albeit if our support involves talking to children about going on visits and things like that, then of course that will improve the well-being of the person that's serving the prison sentence. However, our focus is always on capturing what's in the best interests of the young person. So over the past 9 years, we've worked alongside almost 1,000 children, young people and their families. And as I say, we strive to support their needs and listen to concerns and have their views heard and reflected in policy. And if I get time, I'll be able to just sort of touch upon where we are at the moment with that, because it's been quite exciting for the charity recently. And it feels like people are starting to take note, and that policy is, could, we hope, eventually be some way, reconsidered in the way funding at the moment is within the criminal justice system. Very much it sits with the rehabilitation of the offender rather than the support for the family. But yeah, if we get the opportunity, then I really hope that we can touch upon that. Currently, and it's an estimate, and this was over a 12-month period, so 312,000 children are separated by a parent in prison sentence each year. That's a parent going into custody. It could, it's a large amount, but the truth of the statistic is that that was over a 12-month period. It could have been repeat offences. It could have been people going in and out of custody. However, still nearly double the amount of children that are looked after in this country, and yet we still don't know who they are. There's no statutory system to support or identify the children as it stands. And this statistic here, you can see where it's come from at the bottom, but the 65% of boys with a parent in prison in England and Wales go on to offend. Now, this is a really contentious statistic. I'm completely thoroughly aware. By no means is it deterministic, and we really, use this as a way of us identifying and making sure and checking ourselves that we're thoroughly aware of the vulnerabilities that some of these children and young people face. The addition of potentially being exploited. It's certainly, I would love to see this research done again. Internally, we've done it very informally with the families that we support, but even that is 35% of the families we support at the moment have had some intergenerational offending for the parents, a grandparent. So, really, really should be considered. I think that it's something that is often why families do approach us, especially those with young male teenagers that are concerned. And that's one reason why families self-refer into us. Children with a parent in prison are at increased risk of lots of different, factors. They all live with the loss of a loved one. And sadly, that loss of that loved one really is not acknowledged at all. And there's lots of reading and lots of wonderful research by lots of academics who coin this phrase, very differently. But ultimately, it's this idea of a loss that nobody's acknowledging. A loss where you are expected by society to just not love this person anymore because they've committed this awful thing. And so it's ignored. It's not, and often when schools, say for instance, do acknowledge that a child needs support, they're often then signposted into grief and loss, which, because it's the closest thing to them, but it is very different and quite unique, I have a feeling, for young people. Obviously, as well as stigma that's attached to having a parent in prison when they've done nothing wrong themselves. Lots of really negative media reactions. There's lots of touch points when a family will self-refer into us. Media reaction can be one of them, because they may well have tried to protect the young people by, not telling them the entire truth about the offence, or not telling them at all about the offence. And so, the media reaction can have a huge impact, in turn then can create bullying in school. And then obviously for some people are forced to move homes and change their names. Isolation leaves many children believing they're the only person experiencing parental imprisonment, and really don't speak to their peers about it through fear of how it's going to be received. And so this is a quote taken from somebody: children at school were spiteful and bullying other parents told their children not to play with mine. And that's the harsh truth. While we know children can have negative responses from their peers, generally they can be quite supportive, and sadly it's what's said in the playground that causes a lot of the harm. We've had a child being the only one not invited to a children's birthday party in the class, the only one not to get an invite. Sadly, we've seen WhatsApp, because now we know social media and WhatsApp groups are everywhere, and through media reporting, sadly, one young man was advised by his peer that if my dad done what you done, I would kill myself. So you know, sadly, what we see is a lot of adult negativity. We've had children and young people that have been kidnapped, have been beaten up by adults, all because of an offence that their parents have committed. Okay, I'm just not finding my next slide button, bear with me. There it is. Okay, so again, these are examples of what we might see in the media, and we know why the media report, and although we wish and hope that they didn't report addresses, they do it through self-preservation. They do it because they don't want to be sued. They don't want to be found liable for saying Leanne Manning of Liverpool and there's 10 of us. So they'll name, you know, somebody's address. These are all families that we've supported, and these are all families that have come to us at the point of this hitting the media. So you can see, I mean, the language is, you know, for any young person to see women tortured, elderly man and Ashton Underline were jailed. You know, for this one young girl, we had to really do a lot of intensive one-to-one with her, because the thought of her mum, you know, capable of such a crime really had such a huge impact, and it was massive at the time in the media in Manchester. You know, selfish man strangled ex-girlfriend in Leeds and jumped off a bridge. These are just, you know, really awful things that children now, through the means of social media as well, are seeing, and sadly have such a massive impact. 69% of the children we support never visit a prison, and I think this is really important for us to acknowledge. What children you will often see if you follow our social media is that we are a community-based service, because we are not prison-based family services. I do think that then entails us seeing a lot more referrals for people that sadly don't visit a prison, so they don't go in and see family services and that importance of golden thread. They don't see, I suppose, the money that is given to such services to reduce the offending and increase the rehabilitation of the offender. And so for these children, for us, and when they come to us, that we don't visit a prison, there's almost a further marginalisation, because they don't fit into any of the language they're seeing anywhere, because they're not supporting that loved one in prison, because they're not there helping them rehabilitate, because actually, for some of them, they welcome the prison sentence because it's given them the breathing space that they needed. So why might a child not visit a parent in prison? And there's various reasons, but these are some of the sort of, you know, the ones that are most prevalent. The prison may be too far away. We know that is the case for lots of families. The person in prison may have offended against the child or other children, and so it's a safeguarding issue. That then comes down to lots of factors. It comes down to whether social services are involved. It comes down to the decision of the governor of that prison, you know, and how they risk assess that. The person in prison may have offended against the other parent, particularly relevant in domestic abuse cases. And for lots of people as well, where it isn't even a conviction for domestic abuse, what we then see is a family member taking that deep breath and feeling relieved of this prison sentence, although they might not necessarily be recognised as a victim in the law, you know, the eyes of the law, because the person isn't serving a sentence for domestic abuse. It's I wouldn't like to say they go in hand, because they don't, but what we see is, and I think why we see so many cases where domestic abuse is prevalent, is again because we're not a service within the prison. We're a community-based service. There may not be anyone who can take the child to a visit, and I'll touch on that again in a little bit when I talk about some of the sad cases where we found young people home alone after a parent's gone to prison. Safeguarding the children depending on the offence, similar to what I've said above. And, you know, if it's been a sex offence, then that obviously then that comes into a risk assessment, whether the children can go on. Or the prison may feel that visits are not appropriate for the child due to the behaviour of the prison. This obviously is something that upsets me a lot, because families can rock up at the prison and then be told they can't have the visits because they've decided to sanction the prisoner. And the child may not have been told that their parent is in prison. Sadly, some parents completely avoid going on a visit through that fear of the little one realising actually they're not in daddy's and mummy's work, actually they're in a prison, and to avoid it completely as well. I just think it's really important, because I think for a lot of I think sadly that society feels there must be support in that, because they see this idea of prisons really trying to reach out and connect with family members, that a support exists, but such a huge amount of families don't ever visit a prison. So we have, as I've said, and this has become quite, in the last 12 months, we've had, I think, it's around 7 or 8 young people home alone. So just to put everybody's minds at ease, we're not talking 3 and 5-year-olds, we are talking high school age. But still, nonetheless, children and young people that are sadly home alone. The Labrador pictures there, and again, if you follow our social media, you'll see us say it quite a lot. We know how many Labradors are registered in this country. We don't know how many children have a parent in prison. And the truth is, it's not in any way mandatory for a prison to ask when somebody is triaged into prison if they have children. We hope they all do. How that's then recorded is a different matter, because, as I say, we don't know those figures. What we would hope for is that parents are more than happy and comfortable to say, yes, I've got children at home. However, we know with the situations that we found children home alone, that the parent being triaged into prison has decided against telling them through fear of social service involvement. So just to give you a little idea, we had one young 15-year-old girl who was a bit further north than me, and dad had was accused of sex offences towards some of her friends that she went to school with. She didn't believe that dad was guilty, and because of COVID, it took 2 years to come to trial. And then when he was sentenced, the young girl then at that point was 15. She made it perfectly clear within her community she felt her dad was innocent and that her peers had lied about the offence. And that then she became a target. And sadly, the windows were put in. She was attacked by the community. And it was victim support who came out to her and realised that she was alone and there was no other adults with her. Obviously, then we safeguard that into a social service referral. And for this young person, she was moved sadly into a placement that we didn't feel most beneficial for her, but that was the outcome. We did have another chap here not far from me on the Wirral, another young man whose mum was serving a community order for fraud against an employer. She then went on to commit another fraudulent thing with another offence with another employer in the South Wales area. So when she didn't turn up to one of the jobs she had to, it took 3 months for an employer to put a welfare check in to see where she was, and South Wales police drove to the Wirral, knocked on the door and asked the young lad where his mum was for him to say she's been in prison for 3 months. He was also 14 at the time, doing remarkably well, stand-up job, honestly, living out of the food bank. He was withdrawing mum's widow's pension, going to college, feeding the 4 cats, but sadly he wasn't able to maintain the utilities in the house, so he had bailiffs at the door knocking. He became very extremely isolated. He didn't share with anybody because mum told him not to, that he was on his own. And sadly for those 3 months, because this young man didn't have anybody to go on a visit with him, he hadn't seen mum, he was unable to have a video call because an adult needs to be on that call as well. And with that, we were really able to advocate on his behalf. Social care did keep him in the family home. They did fund paying the utilities. Mum was due to be released a couple of months later. So, initially they wanted to put him into semi-supported accommodation, and having known the area myself, I knew he would be extremely vulnerable there to the potential of sort of criminal exploitation. Thankfully, he was allowed, because his biggest concern was his 4 cats, bless him. And that's all he wanted, to make sure that his cats were okay. But, it shouldn't be happening. This should not be happening. I don't believe it's enough to accept a parent's word when they go into prison that there's nobody at home. You don't need to go. You don't need to check. Have no children. I think there should be another way and means of us be able to cross-reference that, double check, and certainly, try to make sure this doesn't happen again. So I've got a couple of audio clips. I'm just going to play this. This was a dawn raid that took place in Warrington. And it was just really some little voice notes for you to just capture, have a little listen of the direct impacts to young children and young people. As I say, I hope you could hear it. If you couldn't, it is the noise of the police going in on a dawn raid, and then you can hear several children sadly screaming. We work really closely with this family, but sadly the little boy involved still sleeps with mum. And that's a huge thing for children on a witness arrest. That idea that somebody's going to come and swoop the other parent, that broken attachment isn't with the parent in prison. And that is what we work towards all the time. It's re-establishing the safety and the strength of the relationship they've got with the person caring for them, because that's sadly where we see the children regress, bedwet, that separation anxiety that comes from fear, and that lack of trust in the police is what then goes on to cause the whole idea of this intergenerational offending. Because sadly, we know, because I've worked with young people who've told me directly they wouldn't go to a police officer if they were in trouble. They wouldn't go anywhere near them. We have young people who wet themselves when the police officer passes them. So a lot of what we do is trying to re-establish that trust as well. That what the police have, sadly, yeah, okay, they've had to do what they had to do, and that's awful, and I wish the police could do it differently. But that's not the reality of it. And so the reality is then, how do we work with children to ensure that they're getting the support after such events? We've got a couple of others. I'm just aware I can't even see my clock on here, so I'll just quickly whiz through these. So these are a couple of voices. These are direct quotes from children. However, we have used other children to voice them, just to make that clear.
I was asleep in my bed and 8 police officers burst into his house at night time. I was absolutely terrified. I am too scared to sleep in my own bed at night, so I sleep in with my mum. I don't like the dark anymore because I am scared of people bursting into the house and shouting. My house has been raided multiple times. This has really impacted me, and I feel really unsafe in my own home. I have now been diagnosed with PTSD.
So here's some voices on the shame that they felt, especially around school.
Someone came up to me in school and said there's a rumour running around that your dad is in prison, and I cried and I wasn't ready for everyone to know. I didn't have any friends. I lost all my friends. I moved away and they didn't want to keep in contact with me after they found out. I felt lonely.
I think that could have potentially jumped a slide there. Let me just go back and check, because I think there was another one. Voices.
Someone came up to me and said,
sorry to go over each other, I do apologise. There's loads of so many more impacts on children and young people. Their mental health, their ability to thrive in school is massively impacted. Their relationships with friends, they internalize sadly what's happened, and then distance themselves from social things where they might be asked, oh, where's your mum, where's your dad? And these are the things that we know and see. And sadly, we also know there's a huge gap in resources. One of the things I didn't sort of touch upon before, and I think it's because I was talking about it previously, and forgot to mention at the beginning, what we've seen as an organisation is, and I think became because of the back of COVID predominantly, is because what we've seen as prisons closed for visits, release on temporary licence, which is this sort of fully being released. You are released back into the community on day release, on weekend release. For some mums, they will get resettlement release, which enables them to sort of set up childcare and things like that. For a lot of people, they're released for work. So what we did see during COVID, sadly, is this outreach from right across the country of people that were not being able to access support because, you know, schools weren't supportive that the way they could have, you know, should have been, because most of them were closed. Lots of families didn't put their hand up and say, actually, we're vulnerable and can we have that place in school? What we've seen is parents. We had a family in Manchester where a parent was home Monday to Friday, was working, had a really good job, was putting the children to bed, taking them to school, and then would return back to prison over the weekend. And because COVID hit, that just stopped like that, with no explanation to the children. The impacts were huge, not being able to visit, and then when visits could take place, the idea of not being able to hold each other through social distancing rules. And what we've seen then is this outpour of what was originally, before COVID, all the face-to-face service in Oxford and small pockets of other regions, a little bit in South Birmingham, a little bit in Berkshire, just sort of naturally growing around the Oxford area. What we've seen then was families far and wide accessing support for us. And initially that support, and it was right at the height of me starting with them, was let's get everybody online, let's bring a community together that can share an experience, maybe not, don't even have to talk about it, but all know, all the children knew when they were joining arts and craft that they all had a parent in prison. You know, with Zoom, that is one of the good things. We could carry on taking referrals. It wasn't going to impact our capacity. We were delivering the sessions anyway. And nobody anticipated being locked down for as long as we did. And then we just, you know, when the world opened back up again, we couldn't put a lid back on it. We couldn't then say, we're not going to do this service anymore. So we have now, as I say, a couple of months ago, set up a new service, as in, even though we've always been delivering online, now we have a real focus of practitioners that are dedicated to support children and young people right across the country. So we, at the moment, we, you know, and I will talk more if I get the opportunity around referral processes, but it is a case at the moment of it does depend where you are. Predominantly support is online, and so support looks like various different things. On this slide you can see mentoring, where we can find volunteer mentors. Then that's what we always try to do. A consistent other person outside the family home to give young people an opportunity to talk to. We don't find mentors, you know, from the get-go for families. We build a relationship with them. We do the therapeutic one-to-one support with the young people, and then if we feel actually a mentor, taking lots of factors, you know, is what type of role models they currently have in their life, what kind of support they currently have, how long the sentence is, so all of those things, then we consider whether it would be a mentor. We have groups, and as I say now, and I'll talk you through some of the groups that we do online. These are massive. I'm such an advocate for group work. Again, as I say, our one-to-one support, we might have those direct questions with children about how their thoughts and feelings about the parent in prison. Lots of the conversations are around things that children don't feel they can ask the person who's caring for them. And that again comes from this idea, you know, 69% of children never visit a prison. Of that 69%, 40% of them have zero contact with the person in prison, and that is through the safeguarding issues predominantly. So for a lot of them, it's those questions of, does my mum get a Christmas dinner? Is my dad in his cell 24 hours a day? Are they safe? Do they wee in a bucket? Honestly, like they're the questions children just fear so much, and they're the type of questions that they then ask us in one-to-ones. We have activity days. Again, we try and do this where we've localised, so where we've got families in the northwest, I'll try and do an activity day for them. We do draw and talk. Some of our practitioners are trained in draw and talk therapy, so it's, you know, a non-intrusive way of just giving them a space really to talk. Some children don't want to talk about the parents in prison. They just don't even want, you know, that's not what they want to do. Not many, most of them do, but some don't, and so, but we still need to provide that emotional support for them. And then our residential, which is due to take place this Friday. I'll be travelling down to Oxford on Thursday. It's manic, it's crazy. We've got 200, so we've got about 120 young people joining us for the weekend, and they're travelling from right across everywhere in the country. Just let me clock the time. Our online group work, just wanted to give you a taste of the type of things that, so this is our older girls group. So much more with the older girls about socialising. But you can see from here they had a scrapbook timetable. They were all sent a scrapbook, and then in that individual weeks they touched upon these different themes: bucket list, International Women's Day session, postcard from your future self. So very aspirational, very led by future goals and aspirations, because sadly, we know children feel like they can't achieve because, and for a lot of children, we've seen them and they've said firsthand, I can't become a police officer, I can't become a teacher, I can't become a lawyer because of their parents offending. And we just try and instill in them that that isn't true. And of course, you can go on to achieve anything that you hopefully want to. Our adult support groups, again, this is to touch upon how practical they are. Gut health is a big one, that it's the well-being of the people caring for those children is then going to have a knock-on effect in the well-being of the children. So mindfulness journeys, procrastination. The Velveteen Rabbit was particularly really lovely because it's a children's book, but actually the message there about self-esteem, they created artwork, they got a copy of the book, they discussed it. So our online groups, everyone's conscious and aware there's a theme to talk around, but they all know if they bring up having the parents in prison, they bring up the offence, they bring up, there's a safe space, nobody's going to be shocked and horrid that they've talked about it, and certainly nobody's going to judge or make them feel in any way ashamed or stigmatized by it. This again is a huge part of what we do, which is amplifying family voices. Please, I urge you to go on our website and have a look at the blog section. We've been so fortunate for family members, parents in particular, and carers have come out the other side of support and then voiced a blog for us. There's quite a few anonymous ones on there. Sadly, even now, people who have now become adults, even with really fantastic jobs and really good, well-established professions, hide it. So there are people on there who are doing really well at the moment, and it's their choice to stay anonymous, and we understand that. We completely get it, completely and utterly. We've spoken, we've taken young people to youth conferences, and as I say, the blogs. So a lot of what we do, at the moment now, one of the new adult groups was actually a grandparent who came to us and said, I love your WhatsApp community, I love the groups. However, I've also lost a daughter in this. My daughter's serving this prison sentence, and that isn't okay, and I don't know how to cope with that. So it's acknowledging that loss as well, that grandmother lost for the life she thought she'd have in retirement, that hasn't happened. So now we're going to go away and we're going to speak to some facilitators, and that will be one of the next groups that we put on for kinship carers. And again, as I've touched upon, adapting to a post-COVID world with an online offering of support. Just to let you know, of the 900 children, well, now it's nearly 1,000, 0.4% have gone on to offend. Still too many children, and we took a lot of learning from that, and there's things we can improve on. But, that's what we believe is the importance of support, and when children can access it, effective support, then, those harsh statistics of intergenerational offending can massively come down. I didn't know this was an active slide. Yeah, so it says that there for you anyway. And a lot of feedback from families telling us interventions have been life-changing for them. You have the power to get involved by saying nothing. Children will remain invisible. As I said at the beginning, take any learning you've made from this and just consider it, when you go back out into your practices or as students on your placements, and just consider, what questions are we asking? Are we getting really an understanding of what's going on within that family? And always looking for volunteers, always looking for fundraisers. But please, all of you, follow all of our social media, retweet us, share us. We're very proud of the content on our social media. We think it's extremely focused on the work that we're trying to achieve. So please do follow us, and there's our social medias there.